Hey everyone, good morning, good evening if you're on the other side of the globe. We're so excited to have you here. Welcome to another episode of the Lifecyclist, this time with Blair Nordstrom. He will be joining us shortly. I'm so excited to have him over. We met not too long ago and we were discussing gamification and all these cool things. And guess what? He's been doing gamification, of course, for a gaming company, for a lot of gamers out there. So I think there's so much to learn from his experience. And I'm so glad you decided to join us today. Thank you so much for being here. Blair, let me welcome you in.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Woohoo! Okay. Are you guys ready? We're gonna start off right now. So let's jump straight into my first question. Blair, I wanted to ask you to share a little bit more context about the story you're going to share today and about Mistplay, what type of company it is, and what's your growth format.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start off with just kind of explaining a little bit about Mistplay. Our company is called Mistplay. We're a two-sided marketplace that we actually work with our game developers, mobile game developers, to drive loyalty in their games. And then the way it works is that we sorry, let me back up there. We're a two-sided marketplace that works with mobile game developers to drive loyalty, playtime, retention, and spend in their games. And then the way it works is that we have mobile gamers that join our marketplace and they earn points in order to redeem those for major brands gift cards. Um, and so our company growth takes shape in a few different ways. To start, by acquiring new mobile game developer clients, also by acquiring new mobile gamers. Thirdly, would be from gamers discovering and playing new games from our mobile game clients. And then, fourth of all, we have clients increasing their ad campaign budgets as well. And so on our lifecycle team, we have a really kind of unique scenario, again, by being that two-sided marketplace. Um, we're both B2B and B2C, but our team is more focused on the B2C campaigns. And all the work that we do is targeted at the consumer, but it also benefits our B2B clients because it helps drive engagement within their games. So that's a little bit about Misplay and how our lifecycle team works. And the story that we'll go in today is a little bit more about how we've used behavioral triggers to help drive engagement with those games and to show value for our clients and for Misplay.
Amazing. Yeah, awesome. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, like having either the two sides or coming from like B2B and now working at B2C, or coming from B2C and now working on B2B and having to, like apply all of their learnings into like this new kind of environment. There's so many things that are similar because we're still dealing with people, but at the same time, there are some things that are different as well that you kind of have to adapt. So I'm also excited to hear your experience afterwards about doing that because I know you kind of came from a B2B kind of environment. But let's start with the situation that you encountered when you first started working on this project that you're going to discuss with us today. I wanted to know a little bit more like what was the challenge there and what were maybe the key data points that helped you assess the situation and get major insights to then get to the next step.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much every quarter we're looking to drive more value and more impact from our email campaign, right? And our email program. So we were really looking to scale up our volume and our impact for email within the quarter. We had goals that we had to hit by the end of the quarter. And we tried a number of different approaches. We were sending a lot of batch and blast campaigns like newsletters and seasonal campaigns. And we were finding that kind of even though we were sending out these larger campaigns and we're still segmenting them, we felt sufficiently, making sure that we're only targeting, the more active users, that, it's making sure it's interesting and relevant for those users. We're still finding that we're kind of struggling to bring up those open and click-through rates and see business impact from those emails. And so even though we tightened up our segmentation and we tested new creative subject lines and different timing and all sorts of different approaches to improve it, we were finding that our engagement was still remaining low. And we're finding too that that high volume and then the low engagement was also impacting our email reputation at the same time. And so I found that this is a struggle actually in several different roles. Again, when you're trying to hit a goal by the end of the quarter, you want to be, doing these big impact campaigns within the quarter. But at the same time, we were seeing that like our behavioral triggers were, getting as much as 10 times the click-through rate that our one-off emails were getting us, and they're actually showing a significant lift in our business metrics, unlike our batch and blast emails. So then I felt like at that moment, I had this eureka moment that you don't have to switch from batch and blast emails to behavioral triggers all at the same time. You can actually gradually transition into behavioral triggers while still hitting this quarter's objectives. And so that was the main learning there is it is possible to hit this quarter's objectives while optimizing the user journey. You just need to implement those behavioral triggers one at a time.
Hmm. Yeah. And what was your approach then? Could you share your main 3 steps to make an impact on those numbers?
Yeah, so as soon as we kind of realized that those behavioral triggers were the things that we wanted to go after, we were kind of identified all of the different behaviors that we could think about across the customer lifecycle, like thinking from a user perspective. So, like, I would even open up the app and take a look at, okay, from sign up to getting their first game and playing their first game and reaching a new checkpoint and so on. So we worked as a lifecycle team to brainstorm all of these different behaviors that we could use, and that included milestones. So those moments where you can delight and motivate users. So for example, reaching checkpoint 5 in a game or earning enough units to redeem their first gift card. And we listed all of those behaviors from initial sign up to ongoing retention, and there were no wrong answers there. And so step number 2 would be analyzing that data. So once we identified all of these different behavioral triggers that we wanted to really focus on, we worked with our data analysts to take a look at that behavior and see which of those behaviors typically lead to an incremental lift, or where are we seeing the biggest drops in retention and so on, so that we can kind of identify what we should be focusing on. One example there would be if a user reached a given checkpoint in a game, we would find that they're more likely to make an in-app purchase, and then we could use that to inform, okay, on that checkpoint we want to trigger a message to drive that action. And then the third step would be to prioritize those campaigns. So once we had an idea of what the impact was from that perspective, we prioritized our campaign ideas based on the expected impact and the effort that was required and the feasibility from a data engineering standpoint. And then we identified that one of the first campaigns that we wanted to do was this post-purchase trigger. And in this case, we knew that users who most recently made a purchase, we knew that they were kind of at a stage in their journey that they wanted to, or were ready to make purchases in their game. Like they were emotionally invested enough in that game that it made sense for them to make a purchase, and we knew then that it would make sense for us to drive further purchases. And yeah, so we wanted to provide them, in this case, with a timely offer to thank them for their purchase, and then provide them with an offer that within 24 hours in order to help them with their gaming journey.
Amazing. We actually already have a question that I want to show to you. So Marina Gabor asked, did you coordinate triggered emails and in-app messages?
That's an awesome question. Absolutely, yes. I think it's helpful, especially if you have an in-app channel, to consider all of the different channels that you have, whether it's emails, in-app messages, push notifications. We've used a combination of those. there's a lot that kind of factors into that, but a couple of the core considerations would be like if it's, a quick, congrats, that's something that maybe you can send a push notification, or maybe there's additional detail that you want to include, like instructions or, the perks that they earned, or, just other more rich details that you want to include. Like that's where an email would be come in handy. Or and another thing to factor in is just whether, you need more urgent action versus something that, they can deal with later. So, in-app messages we use to congratulate users on certain stages. I would say it was more of those ones where the users were already active, and we didn't need to send them those external communications to like bring them back into the app.
Mm,
Hope that
awesome. Thank you
helps.
for the question,
Yeah.
Marina. Um, and and then you spoke about these three different steps. So to brainstorm user behaviors, to analyze the data, and then to prioritize the campaigns. I wanted to know how long the whole the project kind of like was for, and then how much time you spent and all of those different steps. I was also curious to know, I'm curious about this different stakeholders that had to be involved as well, and how did you coordinate all of that?
Yeah, I think it all depends on the company too, right? So in our case, we're B2C, and there's I would say a fewer steps to the customer journey.
Mm,
So in our case, we just had a simple short brainstorming session within the lifecycle team, um, and that we use that to identify, what are all those, user behaviors that we want to be targeting. And that brainstorming session doesn't have to be long. It's just, again, jotting down those ideas. After that, we refine those ideas. I would say the second step, when we collaborated with the data analytics team, that took a little bit longer because obviously they have to take a look at that correlational data, and see, where we can have the biggest impact. And so that took a couple of weeks to dig into that data.
mhm,
And then the third step, we worked with our creative team specifically, in order to write and design, a motivating email for that. So, as I mentioned, I think like every company is different. That like when you're creating those behavioral triggers from scratch, even though, for example, we just synced up with our lifecycle team, you should also consider looping in data, product marketing, marketing, sales, support, success. Like there's a lot of different teams that you can incorporate into your decision-making process here, and make sure that the whole team and the whole company is aligned on kind of where the most value is.
mhm. And you mentioned before that at the beginning you were kind of like looking at more the batch and blast kind of campaigns because those would kind of drive the results that you wanted within the quarter, because that's usually the time frame that you've got. But it sounds like you were able to create all of this, like renew all of this journey within the quarter too. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. Like it's I again, I used to always think like, okay, we need to personalize everything. We need to create all these triggers. We want to focus on the customer journey. But I think there's that balance between having these batch and blast emails and introducing the new messages. I think like where the key that I think from all of this experience is that, you need to not, you can identify all the different behaviors, but you can just take it one step at a time, right? Like you can
Mm,
easily start with, one project, run that, test it, see what the impact is, then move on to the next one. And it doesn't have to all be in one quarter, right? And I think as long as you're making those gradual improvements quarter after quarter, now you'll start to see those incremental lifts in the long term, right? While still meeting goals for the quarter. So, yeah.
I love the experimentation approach. So this is, yeah, great. Okay, let's talk results. So from all of that effort, what kind of results did you get?
For this particular post-purchase email, this is pretty wild for us, but the campaign so far has driven a 17.6% lift in the average spend per user, which is really exciting. It felt like for a long time we weren't seeing wins on our email channel, and to see, an 18% lift on that in spend, which is a tough metric to drive. I would say, and in our case, what this means is that users are playing games through Mistplay and then spending on an in-app purchase in those games. And
Mm.
so we were able to drive that, and yeah, it was a big success for us.
That's so exciting. And I love that the results were so substantial. And I also love that, um, we talk about, I feel like we're like, we met at an event that talked about a lot of like customizing the customer journey and tailoring the customer journey, and we talk a lot about that. But actually implementing it is where things get a lot harder, because it can be overwhelming to think of, there are so many touch points, there's so many things that you can do. So you have to choose kind of one at a time and start implementing them. So I'm very excited about you guys, and I'm so happy to see that you could do that in a healthy way, and as a team. So yeah.
Thank
I
you.
have a question about, so at the end of the project, or maybe during the project, were there any learnings that maybe you could share here with everyone?
Yeah, I think the first learning from it would just be that action-based messages can be a huge motivator for users, coming back to that motivation factor, I would say, because the timing can't get any more relevant than that. I mean, we always say you have to get personalized, you have to get timely, but if you can find those opportunities where you can kind of catch them right in the moment, they receive it when they're highly engaged already, and they're expecting to see that message, and it's relevant to the action that they just took, like that's the best time to really get in there and motivate the user with, again, well, this kind of goes into the next, the second learning, I would say, or it ties into the first learning, is that it all comes back to having that empathy with the user and putting yourself in their shoes. They're at a certain stage, and but they're also busy with a million other things going on. Like, you're not the only tool that they're using. They have a business to run, or they have, so many other things going on in their day, and so the idea is that, with these action-based messages, you're catching them at the right time, but also using that motivation, and then mixing in, you know, uh, guiding them, and you don't want to make it feel like you're sending them unwanted communications that kind of feel like intrusive ads. Like, it's a good reminder to just keep thinking about, like, when you're sending them a message, you want to be like a friend to them. You want to guide them, you want to cheer them on, you want to give them different suggestions. Like, at the end of the day, they're a human on the other end of the screen, and you want to make sure that you're treating them like one, right? So that would be it. Yep.
Awesome. And yeah, and I love that as well. That makes so much. I mean, everything is, as we discussed before, everything's kind of obvious when you think about it, but it's kind of hard to, get to the point where you're like, okay, this makes sense to me. I'm gonna go ahead and implement it. But it's so like, if we're talking to the user while they're still like hanging out with you, while where they're still like, excited, or they're excited because they just did something, it makes so much more sense than, having to kind of like try to get in touch when they're maybe doing another task that they have to do, and then it just feels like, you know I can't, like, I would love to go and play, but right now I need to be here, I don't know, doing the dishes
Yep.
or something like that. So please, don't let me in
Exactly.
right
Well,
now.
and I would say, like, another thing that we haven't discussed previously, but was the idea of, like, um, you want to catch users while they're engaged. You're more likely to, keep your existing users engaged, and there's more value out of nurturing your active users, than, letting them, lapse or churn and now trying to re-engage them, right? So I think that,
Mhm.
There's a lot of different companies that struggle with leaky bucket syndrome, and this is another instance where if you can use those action-based campaigns, that can actually help you keep those users engaged, so you're not going to run into that problem.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. We do have a question here that I want to
sure.
bring up. So Tasha is asking, do you have an advice that would be different for service-based businesses?
Um, in terms of like if we're talking about action-based or motivational messages or milestones or any of those types of things, I would say like, what comes to mind would just be to thank them for their service. I mean, I haven't personally worked with a service-based business myself, but what comes to mind would be to, thank them or after they've done, so many different, calls with you, or I would say, when they've completed a call, you can send them a thank you. I think like there's still when you're thinking through those actions of what they've done, like just giving them a kudos for what they have done. I think that's what mainly comes to mind for me. Like I'd be interested to think through that further, but on the spot, that's what I got for you. Hope that helps, Tasha.
Thank you, Blair. I do have an example that may be helpful too with for Tasha. When I worked in finance and with investments, we mapped out how when customers would connect with us more and also when they would refer us. So we brought them in, spoke to them, asked those questions of like when, like when does investment usually come up, when you're talking to your friends and things like that. And then from there, instead of like asking, I don't know, like asking for a referral at the end of the month because we needed to reach a certain quota, we would find ways to create relevance and help them feel like they knew what they were doing with their investments in front of their friends so that their friends would ask, so it seems like you know so much, how do you like, why are you so well informed? So we created like things like that. So I feel like it depends a lot on the service that you're providing, but like mapping out that customer journey might look a little different when it's service and it's not like a massive amount of customers, and you might just need to talk to your customers and do more like of a qualitative survey with them to understand what those moments are. So I hope that's helpful.
One thing you brought up there was just going back to customer journey. Like, I mean, I was trying to think of very specific moments in the journey. I was like diving right in, but you kind of gave me a good reminder that it's helpful to kind of zoom out and just take a look at all of the different behaviors that your customers are going through as they're booking, as they're completing the service call and follow up and so on. Like there might be, there's an acquisition stage, there might be a retention stage and an advocacy stage, and then mapping out the different behaviors on those, I think is kind of where it's helpful to start instead of what I was suggesting, diving right into the individual moment. So I would start with that is identifying kind of the different stages and what actions they're taking in each of those stages.
Thank you, Blair. And we have another question from Marina. She said, did you find that user engagement increased after engaging with that first behavior triggered message?
Um, we definitely saw it for that message, and I would say for some subsequent messages, we haven't kind of looked at actually. We have looked at the aggregate, and we're just seeing that as we're introducing more of these behavioral triggers, that we're actually driving up our average metrics. Like we are seeing an increase in open rates, increase in click-through rates, increase in our business metrics as we introduce every one of them. So I would say absolutely. Like I think that, the percentage of messages that we're sending out are becoming gradually more and more of these action-based messages, and we are seeing a lift in overall user engagement as a result. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. And okay, you've worked with B2B most of your career before joining Mistplay. So I'm curious what learnings that you got from your experiments in B2C now that you wish you'd known when you were working with B2B.
Yeah, it's a good question. I was actually in B2B for almost 10 years before I moved into Misplay, and so now I've been in B2C for about a year and a half now. I would say that I really underestimated the value of really celebrating milestones, like absolutely celebrating them in order to delight users. I think that um, and I would put the emphasis on delight users because in my past B2B roles, I would say I focus so much more on what the customers need to do next, like whether the individual users or the companies needed to do next, that it essentially undervalued their wins. And I think that, you know, at Misplay now, we have several campaigns dedicated to recognizing the progress that users are making. But now I see that it's actually relevant to any business because, like, it's always humans that we're talking to on the other end, right? Again, and celebrating those milestones that they're, whether they're completed a certain action that they really needed to take towards the next step, or they've done a certain action a certain number of times, like any of those times that you're celebrating those milestones, you're making users feel good, which gives them motivation to do the next thing. So I would say to kind of wrap that up, like it's instead of just glossing over the wins, is actually celebrating those wins to genuinely make the user feel good when you are celebrating them.
Hmm, I love that. Definitely something I'll consider for us too. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And now let's think the opposite. So, what learnings did you bring from your B2B experience into your B2C experience?
Yeah, I would say there's actually, at its core, I feel like lifecycle marketing is the same for B2B as it is for B2C. And I found that, really crazy as I come into B2C because you know, there's maybe three different reasons why. Like to start, I would say every company has a customer journey and an aha moment. It's just that B2B requires, more complex decision making, it requires more stakeholders, whereas B2C is more transactional and you need to guide users to the aha moment a little bit faster or a lot faster. Um, Number two, every company has human customers that have emotions and they need to make logical decisions. So I would say both B2B and B2C actually require relationship building to foster retention and loyalty, again, at kind of different levels. But it requires you to, at the end of the day, put yourself in the user's shoes and imagine what their day looks like and understand what motivates them. And number three, that every company has at least some level of data that they can use to prioritize and personalize their campaigns. Some action that their users are taking that they can use to kind of inform kind of what happens next or what correlates with the next action. And so, it all ties back into like, again, they're humans, but I would say in summary, I've brought the learnings that I need to understand that I need to understand the customer lifecycle, our human customers, and our user data so we can build the most effective lifecycle campaigns.
Amazing. Thank you. We have another question from Melissa. She's asking, what's the best way to balance celebrating wins with the push towards the next step?
Hey, Melissa, thanks for asking. I would say, you want to identify where there is the most value, I would say, in celebrating the wins. Like if, we'll talk about this a little bit further on too, but I would say wherever you see the greatest drop in retention or wherever you see the most value for the action that the user took, that's where you would really put more emphasis on that win, just so that you can kind of help further that motivation, if that makes sense. So instead of just kind of pushing towards the next step, at that point, you're really like taking a step back. We also have, there's a lot of different examples of companies where you notice that they're celebrating those milestones, and so we'll chat about that in a bit too. But I would say it's identifying where is there more value in celebrating those wins. When can you take the time to do that? And I mean, it's also helpful to remember that you can always send them another message if you need to drive the next step. Like I think that there's still, as long as you're testing it and just seeing the value in it, like maybe you can test something that is strictly just celebrating their win, see if that drives lift, and if it doesn't, then test adding some additional information or test A/B tests, one just celebrating the win versus one pushing the next step. Those are a couple different ideas there.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Blair.
Melissa.
And yeah, thank you, Melissa, for your question. Blair, I want to show you some of the things that are happening here on the comments. And okay, I'll share some of the cool comments here just so that we feel like we celebrate our wins now. So we have amazing, such a good reminder. Contextual messaging is so key. A lot of like really positive feedback about this conversation so far. So let's take that time to celebrate a little bit. Love it. Melissa is saying, love this conversation. Thank you, Blair, for sharing great insights. And then Melissa's here again. Awesome insight. Thanks, Blair. Woohoo! Awesome. Okay, so ready for the next step? Now that
Yeah,
we
let's
celebrated a
let's
little
jump
bit.
in. Yeah. Yeah, thank you everyone.
How do you balance incentivizing your next move for the customers and just celebrating the next milestone that they've achieved? When we discussed, I know that you kind of answered that question to Melissa, but you discussed a few different steps to get that going, like a few different pillars. I wanted to give you some space to talk about that.
Yeah, of course. I think it ties in a little bit with that. I would say there's I would say four main things that you need to consider when you're looking to really incentivize it versus not incentivize it. The first would be the value. So what benefit does it have for the user and the business? So for example, like does completing the next step typically lead to a lift in lifetime value or a lift in retention? Number two, I would say the complexity. So what effort is required at that next step? For example, is it where you see the biggest drop off in retention? Number three would be the context. So whether the user is engaged or disengaged, and you might find that those disengaged users require a little bit more motivation and that it might not make sense to try to include an incentive for someone who's already engaged. And then fourthly, the cost, of course. So how much of an incentive would actually motivate users? You have to consider, their or their perception of what offer you're providing, and whether that's going to actually influence them to take action. And then beyond that, would you be able to scale up that cost? Like let's say that test is successful, would you be able to scale it up, 10x, and still be able to cover that? And do you have the budget for that? So to tie that, kind of wrap that up, again, there's four main things. Number one, the value. Two is the complexity. Three is the context, and four is the cost.
Amazing. Thank you for
Oh
sharing
yeah,
that.
and I did want to add, I do have this additional note here, is that again, you can kind of test as you go. I think it's important to not just be like, okay, we're gonna do incentivize versus not incentivize. Sometimes, like in the past, we implement a non-incentivized messages and then realize that users aren't engaging, and then we start to look at how we can optimize it. And one of the considerations might be like, let's include an incentive. We might look at subject lines and all of this other stuff as well, but there is a opportunity, again, depending on the value and the cost and such, of whether it makes sense at that point to incentivize it. And then other times we actually have started off by testing incentive versus no incentive at the same time, and then understand there, if we find that users respond similarly to the incentivized as they do to the non-incentivized, and we're just essentially handing away money, then you can, then opt to not incentivize it at that point. So definitely comes back to experimenting.
Hmm. Amazing. And in your case, you found out that incentivizing made sense, right? For you
For
guys.
this particular instance,
Mm.
the post-purchase trigger, yes, it makes sense. Yep.
Okay. I got another celebration here I want to show from probably someone in your team, Zane.
Yeah. Thanks, Zane.
Cool. Looking back, do you remember experimenting with anything that did not work out for you at the time? And what were your learnings from that?
I love this question because I was thinking, like, if you're not, failing, then you're not, you're not life cycle marketing. You're not learning, you're not growing. Um, I would say I've experimented a few times with a game recommendation, like a personalized game recommendation email that helps new users discover, or sorry, helps users discover new games. And we're thinking kind of like Netflix, where they make recommendations based on what you watched. And that like seemed like a no-brainer to us, being in a marketplace. And our we're finding that it wasn't working for us. We tested a whole bunch of different versions of it over time. Like once we sent the first one, it was like, okay, maybe we need to add more game details, like icons and titles and ratings. And then we added a limited time offer next. And then we tried different intriguing subject lines to try to loop people in. And but still, nothing seemed to resonate with users even after testing those multiple versions. And so I would say I had two main learnings from that experience. Like the first is to actually learn from failed tests. This is another one that like, sounds obvious when you say it, but it's easier to just like sometimes to just move on and just be like, okay, like this one failed. Let's not do that anymore. Let's run on, move on to the next, biggest bet. But I would say like if you expected a major impact from something, but you didn't get the results that you need, like you need to form new hypotheses. And I would say like again, the first hypothesis for us was that the email didn't have enough information about the games for the user to make a decision. Like we wanted to include what, type of game it was and how many ratings there were and what was the average rating, and you include some of that. We're including social proof now, right? And we're including some more information instead of just like an icon and a title. We thought, okay, that would work, but still didn't work. So then, our latest hypothesis is that users just aren't in the right journey stage for them to try a new game. So for example, if they're already really invested in another game, they might not be ready to try a new game. So, in the future we might, be testing, another version of this to a more targeted audience. And I would say the second learning would be to just not be afraid to continue experimenting. To start with your you might have multiple hypotheses to like why it failed, but start with your top hypothesis and then go from there. And so again, we tested a bunch of game details, then we tested a top game recommendation instead of like three columns in the email that say, here's your three games we recommend. We tried, a hero at the top saying, here's your top recommendation, and then the three columns, and then we tested a limited time offer. And so I would say, again, in the future, we plan on targeting users who aren't emotionally invested in another game. And yeah, it just comes back to constantly learning and constantly experimenting.
Hmm. One thing that comes up to me as well as you're talking about this is that I like how you kind of tired all of the, I mean, it tried to change the design, change the copy, change a bunch of different things instead of like just trying one email that was focused on that and then that one didn't work and like assume like, oh, this is not how users are not ready to go move forward, but you tested different designs, it tested different, so like giving them more information, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I think that going into that like sort of detail is just so valuable, and it feels again like kind of obvious, but I feel like a lot of us just like want to jump into a conclusion and then get to the next to try something new, So I really
Yeah. Well, I
appreciate you
feel like
sharing that.
reflecting back on it too. I think again one of the deciding factors there was the expected impact of this message, right? Like, and maybe there's a bit of stubbornness involved too, just like, can't I just can't accept that this is not going to work. Um, but at the same time, I mean, like again, personalized game recommendation email. I feel like we all would agree that that makes sense, right? Like you're showing games that the user is probably gonna like. So again, like factoring in at the end of the day, like if you expect this thing to have an impact, you have a strong, hypothesis, so like why it would be impactful, just then it kind of builds, enough faith to continue testing with it. Whereas, like let's say something has a very small audience and we're expecting a smaller incremental lift obviously at that point then too, you start to question, okay, does the effort that you're putting into those optimizations outweigh what the impact of this message would have, right? So I guess it comes back to impact versus effort at that point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little more celebration here. Love hearing about all the things you've tested. Thank you,
Thank you.
Marina. We have a question from someone on LinkedIn saying, a bit general question. What are some kinds of incentives that might work well for apps and software other than credits? Do you have any ideas around this?
Yeah, I'll chime in and maybe you do as well. But I would say first thing that comes to mind, I mean, there's different types of businesses, obviously. You might be testing a discount. I've seen that actually as well. A app called Mimo that I'm using to learn to code. They said, okay, if you maintain a 15-day streak in January and you send us a screenshot of your streak, we'll give you 50% off. So that's of the next plan, and so you can test adding a percentage off a subscription or a percentage off of another plan. I would say, if you're not subscription based, I mean, maybe there is opportunities for you to, let them claim something more physical or tangible. I'm just thinking outside of the box here again. Like I'm not in this scenario, but I'm thinking like maybe there is an opportunity for you to give them, fun swag or rewards otherwise. Again, just coming back to like you'll have to think of what options you have available to you if it's things that you can discount versus things that you can reward them with, and then again at the end of the day you can always fall back to just giving them a intrinsic motivation, right? Like we're talking about intrinsic versus extrinsic. There's a lot of ways that I think we can think about motivating users by giving them discounts and, appealing to their logic, but there's also on the other side the intrinsic motivation of like appealing to their emotion and just again like congratulating them for the work that they're doing or the things that they're doing. Mariana, do you want to add any other ideas there?
I was just thinking of ClassPass. I know it's an app. I love it. I think it's great. And I think one of the reasons why I still love it and I use it is that um, I feel like it interacts with me. It's almost like a kind of like a fitness friend in a way, because it's not just allowing me to have access to these awesome studios where I like to exercise, but it's also asking me how it went every time. And it's interesting because I would think that that's not a good idea to ask people like to rate something every time they come back from an exercise. But now I kind of feel like, yeah, you want to know, like, And I want to tell you that this is great. I love this, the teacher that I exercised with. So I think that's one thing that they do that is rewarding, at least to me, because it makes me feel heard. And it's not necessarily like credits or anything. They do work with credits too. So with referral, they work with that. And I do work kind of hard to get people into ClassPass because of, the credits that I might get from doing that. So I think there is a bunch of like good examples out there. I think ClassPass is maybe somewhere you could find some inspiration in.
I've thought of another one as well because from a gamifying perspective, if your team is able to put in the time for it, like there's the idea of badges or rewards as well.
Mm.
Like I think that starting to put together different badges that say if they reach certain milestones or if they do something for the first time or those types of things. I mean, we've seen tons of different examples. Fitness apps are really good examples of that, or any learning apps as well. Like it's kind of really showcasing in another way, whether it's earning a badge or highlighting their streak, or there's I guess those other ways as well that you can incentivize users. So
100%, 100, and it's crazy because like with Fitness Plus, for example, do you use that or were you thinking of something else?
I've been using a different app.
Okay, okay, but
Yeah.
anyways, but with Fitness Plus, I got those like badges, and I get, of course, there are the rings. They kind of have to close your rings every day, and then they remind like if I'm doing some sort of exercise with a teacher at the Fitness Plus app, they remind us of the rings too. So the whole messaging is very kind of it's consolidated across my user experience, and I'm reminded of it every day. And imagine the effort that someone has to put to like charge their watches every day, remember to put them on in the morning if you're charging overnight, and like things like that. And there's nowhere to kind of like it's not like you're going to get those badges printed and put them on the wall or show them off to anybody. It's just for you, but it feel kind of like, at least I feel like, I deserve this and I want to get that streak for the week or for the month or something like that. So yeah, there's so many different ways. And I think another maybe thing to think of is also like what makes sense to your brand, the kind of brand that you are. Because you also, if you just if you're more premium brand, I think the like badging it up more and giving less discounts would make more sense than if you're so there are different ways, and all of those things will also help people perceive your product in a different way, so you kind of have to be aware of that as well. I have a question for you about just your experimentation process. So what does it look like right now?
Yeah, I think we have three main steps here. I would say that if we start by just prioritizing a specific experiment based on the impact and effort and urgency. Then we set up a campaign brief that we use to document all of the details like the KPIs, the audience, the flow, the creative. So putting together a whole brief. And then in some cases, in very specific cases, working with managers to review that, and also constantly working with other stakeholders to make sure that they are aligned, whether it's on the message or what the objective is of the campaign and so on. So setting up that campaign brief and making sure you have alignment with all the teams involved. And then the third step would just be to actually, I should also mention too, like in some cases, if we're doing something drastically different, we will consult with our data analysts as well to make sure that we're setting the experiment up in a way that we can make sure that we will see statistical significance or maximize the chances that we will
Mm.
once it's complete. So there are scenarios where we will work with our data analysts on those, but generally we already have a good feeling of how we set up, our control groups versus our treatment groups and stuff. And then, yeah, the final step again would just be after the campaign has run long enough to show statistical significance. We have a lift dashboard in Tableau that we use to understand whether, a campaign drove a lift. And then if it didn't perform well, we hypothesize why, and then potentially add another experiment to the backlog at that time. And again, documenting it along the way and in the campaign brief, and as well, we have a split testing CSV that we use to also document our split tests to say like, okay, here's what we're finding, so that way we can kind of build theories around that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. And how long is usually that cycle?
I think it varies. It varies depending on like the size of the experiment as well. Like I think that prioritizing it, we're constantly, prioritizing our campaigns pretty much every week. And I would say we plan it out for the month, but once we've done that, setting up the campaign brief can generally be pretty quick. Like you have an idea of what the campaign's going to be, and you just need to document it and get feedback on it. I would say, the longest portion is just waiting for the campaign to run, and also waiting for enough time after the campaign is complete to take a look at the metrics. You need to wait for some of those metrics to mature first before you take a look. So all in all, like again, it depends. I would say like maybe a month, depending on, if it's a short enough campaign, a couple weeks. It might be about a
Mhm.
month to from start to finish to see the results of an experiment.
Hmm, awesome. Oh my gosh, this has been so good. But I'm going to ask you for another piece of advice. You've shared so many, but I know you have something else for us. Is there anything that you'd like to share with life cycle folks that will help them be more efficient with their experiments and become better at iterating and finding sweet spots?
Yeah, so I love this one because this is not something that I had thought about earlier in my career. It's like a new learning from about the last year or so. I would say like start with bigger and bolder tests whenever you can. Like instead of testing, like in the case of a scenario incentivized campaign, like don't start with testing $1 versus $2, for example. You might test like $1 versus $10, or don't start with just like testing emojis in the subject line, but instead really be testing like the sentence structure, like front loading keywords or asking questions, and really be like thoughtful and about having like meaningful tests. And I would say like what I've really learned, it's more useful to understand, to see significant results first from those more bold tests and then optimize it than it is to just like constantly stumble across a bunch of insignificant results and then continually hypothesize why. Like you might test $1 versus $2 and then one versus three and then one versus four, and it's like, okay, you're still not like finding it, and you're spending so much time trying to like figure out if it's like the dollar amount, when it's like if you can start with a bolder test, again, wherever you can, whether it's testing, really bold heading, or again, it's starting with those bolder tests and then kind of honing in on a very specific amount, then again, failing over and over again with smaller tests. Yep.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. We have already discussed this, but I was wondering if you have any other um, brands in mind or businesses that you think are doing a great job with life cycle marketing that you kind of look up to or get inspired from.
Yeah, I would say the number one that I feel like every company I've worked at goes back to and uses as inspiration is Duolingo. Because from my perspective, what's awesome is that they maintain a consistent voice throughout all of their messages. They're always sending frequent notifications to stay top of mind. They celebrate user milestones, like they're motivating users to reach new milestones and so on. So, um, they're a really great example, at least from a B2C perspective, that they really gamified language learning, which I would say is like typically overwhelming and tiring and maybe not, it's not easy and fun otherwise. They've actually, turned it into something fun. So, I mean, I feel like they're the gold standard from a B2C perspective, especially from a software perspective. again, I come from a very big software background, but the other example that I would have on the B2B side would be Asana. Again, they feel very consistent messaging, but I would say the timing feels right whenever they're like nudging you to invite teammates and integrate other tools. And another recent example that I received from them is like they congratulate you on adding your first project. Like that's something that like, I'm sure is a big deal, in terms of what they see on the customer life cycle. So, um, and again, wrapping it up there, like the emails all have very consistent branding, which I think like kind of adds to that professionalism and um, easier to remember those experiences when they're consistent and professional. So
Amazing. We're also sharing your LinkedIn profile with folks on YouTube in case they want to connect with you and ask more questions. I do have a few more that I want to go through before we wrap this up, but main one, like next one is, how do you see interactive emails impacting lifecycle marketing? Have you tried? Have you tested them at all? Like, what's your perspective there?
yeah, see, the number one thing here is like interactive emails. They really like increase engagement by reducing the friction of an extra click. Like they kind of in some ways are kind of like an extension of your brand where instead of the user having to go into your brand to engage or into your product to engage with you, like they can actually engage with you through another channel. And so I think like just adding to that, like not only a better brand experience, but I would say again, reducing that friction, not having to do an extra click to take the action that they want to take, whether it's like filling out a survey or a poll or, typing in whatever information. Like I think there's a lot of different things that you can do that don't have to be that one extra click. And you'll see, in when you don't have that extra friction, that's one less step in that funnel that users will drop off. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And have you had, so you've mentioned some advice for people. Is there like a learning that you've had in your career that's more like more general that you take like you're taking for all the next experiences you're having?
Yeah, I would say like if you don't already have a customer journey map, then make one. I feel like this might be, obvious to some people, but not to everyone. Like a customer journey map is just so crucial to have. It's important to work across the org to get different ideas on what it should be and land on a journey map that you agree on. I feel like, you know, especially earlier in my career, I thought, journey map just kind of sounds like a fluff term, but in reality, it really does help you drive decisions across the org. It helps you identify, stages that need improvement, maybe gaps in the messaging that you have. It helps you understand, what users might be thinking at different stages and what they might be feeling at different stages. It helps you really just like improve your targeting and improve your messaging. Um, I would say, and maybe it also identifies data points that you need to add to your CRM in order for you to, better target your messaging. It helps you understand like what user types you might be neglecting. Um, yeah, there's just so many reasons why I think like it is more valuable and I feel like is should be kind of the core of lifecycle marketing. And um, uh, I would add on, yeah, you can like, oh, I feel like I've I have more notes than I even realized here, but um, I would say like you can eventually build entire teams around the different stages as well. Like it's I've seen life cycle teams start from scratch where you have just a general life cycle team and then they grow into you have an onboarding team and you have a expansion team and so on. So um, yeah, just to tie it all together, like I would say just a customer journey map is one of the most important things that you should have as a lifecycle marketer to make sure that you're building the right campaigns.
Yeah. That's amazing. And that also like the map that helps everyone who's onboarded into your team to quickly start adding value to your
Exactly. It's
team.
a it,
Yeah.
to that point, it's amazing for internal communication. So yes.
Yeah. Does your customer journey map look like right now? Like in what kind of format is it and how often do you update it?
It's a good question. I think like it's always evolving, and it's never perfect. We have a diagram built out in Miro, and we're constantly working on it. I would say for each stage in there, we've identified the exit and the entry criteria for those stages, what common user actions, like the user goals, company goals, again, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and I would say, yeah, it's constantly evolving. I wouldn't be able to pinpoint an exact time frame where we refresh it.
Hmm. Amazing. And okay, let's finish strong. I have one last question for you. We're a little bit over
Sure.
time. What would you like the future of life cycle marketing to be like? How do you envision it? Let's visualize it together.
Yeah, so I would say AI obviously is, the big thing last year and this year as well. I can potentially, I would expect, all of our marketing automation platforms or CRMs to start embedding AI tools even further into what they're currently offering. So, we've seen AI tools for subject lines and content and code and stuff, but you're really seeing AI being implemented to build out journeys. Typing in a prompt to say like build out a journey over the course of 2 weeks that factors in, you know, our brand and our target audience and our metrics that we're trying to drive and our key messages and implementing all of that information and it kind of spitting out a recommended journey from that. And, thinking through it, I would say that it's not going to replace what lifecycle marketers do, but it would be, or in growth teams, it's actually going to just change kind of the emphasis where it does a lot of that upfront legwork, and then what you can do is then customize it and personalize it to what you need to see and what you're expecting, and hopefully streamline the process. So I would say AI journey builders are going to be what we're expecting next, I think, in marketing automation platforms, and lifecycle marketers need to be ready for that.
Amazing. Amazing. I can't wait for that to happen too. Blair, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your commitment to offering this much value to people here, to our audience. We were so excited to have you, and I was especially excited to see like how caring you were about this whole thing, and you spent so much time thinking of all of this, all of that you wanted to say, and it's been amazing. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed
Thank you
your
so
time
much.
here too.
I loved it. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for all your commentary and questions. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. One last celebration. Thanks for an insightful session.
Thanks, Marina.
Awesome. Okay, everyone. I'll see you all in our next episode. And again, thank you, Blair. We cannot wait to see what else you're going to be testing with and to hear more from your experience, your advice, and your learnings in the years to come. So thank you. And goodbye, everyone.